Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here today. This is like the time of the day where like they would film a 5-hour energy commercial, I'm feeling it. So we're going to make through it here. Today I'm going to talk about AI and the future of testing. But my name is Jordan Powell. I'm a developer experience engineer at Cypress. Anyone heard of Cypress before? A couple people. All right. I am actually a Google developer expert in Angular, so I appreciate you guys letting me hang out with you cool kids here for this conference. Super excited to be here. And I am from a tiny little town called Wapakoneta. We just call it Wapak for short. There's less than 10,000 people that live there, but fun fact is it is the home place for Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. So if you like, space and that sort of thing, we got a museum and a couple coffee shops, so you can come say hi to me if you're ever in Wapakoneta, Ohio. All right, disclaimer. So today's talk, I am not an AI expert. So if you came for that, I'm sorry to disappoint you. But I do spend an abnormal amount of time thinking about testing, which is probably the least funnest topic to talk about. So I've thought about this topic quite a bit, and some of the things we're thinking about at Cypress in terms of AI and how it maybe shapes the testing landscape. And so basically wanted to sort of gather that information and kind of present it for you here today. So how does AI work? This is nothing earth-shattering, but for those of you who are not super familiar, how I'm going to sort of discuss it today is like this. We're going to give a prompt. We're going to send it to this magic AI box. We don't know what happens inside, but then at the other end, some answer comes back. We can then reprompt it and sort of go through this pattern over and over and over again. So naturally, I went to AI and I asked, what is AI? And it said this: AI is the field of computer science focused on creating intelligent machines that can learn, reason, and act autonomously, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end it said, as AI continues to evolve, ethical considerations are crucial. I wasn't sure how I felt about AI telling me that, so we're just going to sort of ignore this part. But then I asked it, what is automated testing? So I wanted to get its perspective on both of these things. And it gave me this answer. Automated testing uses software to streamline and process the running of tests and verifying results. Its key benefits are efficiency, accuracy, speed, blah, blah, blah. And then it said, overall, automated testing is essential for modern software development, ensuring quality, faster delivery. And I'm like, okay, yes. Now I'm back on board. I can get down with AI. This is great. But the TLDR is computers are really good at repetitive tasks, actually like over 10 million times faster than even the smartest of our brains. So things that are repetitive, if we can get computers to do them, that's much, much more efficient. So today, I'm going to talk about the effects of AI in terms of two things. Essentially, test generation. How can we generate tests using AI? And how can we do test conversion? So converting one type of test to another framework or something like that using AI. So the first part we'll focus on is test generation. And so we're going to do two examples, and we're going to live code this. And this is always the crazy part because every time I do this, I get a different answer. So we're going to see how it goes. But we're first going to do a high-level end-to-end test. So sort of give it a very generic, like, hey, I need you to do this end-to-end test, and we'll see what it does. And then we'll do something very specific, like a very specific instructions for like a unit test. So our very first example, let's copy this, because I want to write a test that we'll use. Let's use Gemini for this. This is Google's AI machine. So let's copy this code. Go to a project here. Not this one. I'm hoping not to give you guys like whiplash from all the switching back and forth here. Let me save this. Let me run this project with Cypress. So I'm basically asked it to create an end-to-end test using Cypress that visits the VueConf website and make sure that I am a speaker and have a talk today at 2 o'clock. So let's see how it does. It failed right away. Okay, so it says that we couldn't load VueConf.us. Let's look at this code. This is probably very simple because it didn't infer when I said VueConf.us website that it needed like an HTTP or something like that. So we could resave this, see what it is now. So we're better, we're closer, right? But the thing is it sort of just made some general suggestions, I'll say. So what it's doing is saying, hey, look for some class named schedule container. I didn't tell it to look for a class named schedule container, it just guessed. Now sometimes it will use like sci.contains, which is basically a way of just saying like across the DOM, look for this text. And usually if I get a result like that, on an end-to-end test, generally it's not necessarily best practice because you could have multiple things that have that phrase. Maybe you're on the about page and you say, I want a test that contains about. Well, you might say about multiple times in that page. So generally it's not best practice. So normally you would use not really a class, you would use an ID or like a accessibility attribute, something like that. So without giving it very specific instructions, it does a good job, but it just kind of makes stuff up, right? So kind of a mixed bag in terms of how that works. So let's look at another example. So in this example, we have a Vitis test that it's a function that basically is like, hey, it's super simple. You get the product of the total of a product, you get the tax percentage, and it's just going to calculate up the total. Pretty simple. So let's add this prompt, wherever this is. Let's use ChatGPT 3.5 for this. See how it does. We're going to copy this code. I don't know what this is from. It's interesting. From Vitis import test. I think they messed this up. Let's do this. Yeah. So, we have some interesting things here. This is not good. Let's try a different one. Let's try Copilot. How about that? Let's grab this again. And the thing is like, I tried this 10 minutes ago, got a completely different response, which is sort of the fun of this. All right, let's see what Copilot gives us this time. All right, this is looking better, I think. Okay. Okay, path to your function. This is kind of cool. I could have told it, hey, the function that you're going to test is in this path. So I could have given it more specific instructions. But here, I also need to put it in describe. Now, if I save this and run my test, let's see if this works. Hey, there we go. So it got us pretty close, but again, like it still required some level of knowledge. And by the time I did all that, I could have just wrote the test, right? So I think that there's a mixed bag on this, but it's kind of a fun experiment. So overall, it's kind of mixed reactions for the test generation for both those examples. I've done it in like multiple times where it'd be like, this is exactly how I'd write this test given the information I know. And then other times it just makes stuff up. So like I said, it's sort of a mixed bag. So now let's talk about test generation, right? Because our test conversion. So generation is great because no one likes to write tests, right? Like it's not fun. No one likes it. I kind of like it secretively, but don't tell anyone. But, you know, it's one of those things. So it's like if we could do it faster or not do it at all, like that would be awesome, right? But test conversion could also be really cool because we could take something like, the only thing worse than writing tests is writing tests in like a platform or framework that you despise, or it's really slow or it's painful. So it's like, hey, if I could convert this really old test in Selenium or some other like framework maybe you don't really enjoy working with and convert it, that would be really cool. So let's work on a framework to framework conversion, see how this works. So in this case, naturally, I'm just going to use a Vitis test. We just converted to, we generated a Vitis test, and now we're going to convert a Vitis test back to a Cypress, not an end-to-end test, but a component test. Does any of you guys use component testing? Cypress? A few people? Yes, Jess did, yes, absolutely. Perfect. Let me get out of this. Okay. Here it is. Okay, so here we have the project. Okay, I need to tell it to our prompt. Let's go back to Gemini and tell it, hey, I want to take this Vitis test and I want to convert it to Cypress component test. Now, Cypress component testing has not been out like super long, like a couple of years. So I found that the results sometimes are a mixed bag, where like something like end-to-end testing with Cypress, it's been around for many years. So the models that are used are generally have more support for end-to-end testing. But it looks like here in Gemini, I've had good results with this. So if we go back here, let's go ahead and paste this. And I got some TypeScript stuff not working in this project, so ignore that. And let's go ahead and import. Couldn't figure out the import in our result, but let me go ahead, configure this, and it didn't work, but it kind of worked. Yeah, you know, but it actually did use. It's failing on something which is based upon a good assumption, which is at least something I would prefer, because it's kind of leaning towards good behavior instead of just making crap up using bad patterns. So what it's doing is we're trying to get a message using some data test attribute, which a lot of people prefer using like a data attribute like data test or data sci or something like that for testing. We didn't tell to use that, so it sort of, I guess, figured that we should be using that, so it guessed that. But we could very easily fix this test to do something like, this is a component test, so there's not much in here. So we could just say, sci.contains, save this, and our test passed. So again, with very limited sort of interaction, we got this test working. I could probably write this test significantly faster than generating this, but you could imagine if you had an entire suite of tests for this, you could probably work something out that works good. And again, I'm just using the base models from these things. You could build a model that does all these things the way you guys prefer, that says, I always want to use a data test attribute or something like that. So we could specifically give it those instructions if we wanted to. So again, test conversions, kind of a mixed bag. Like, it was good, probably a little better than the others, but again, not perfect. So to summarize sort of where we're at today and kind of how I'm thinking about this, is there's some pros with this. So obviously the biggest pro being that it's very efficient to write tests. If it works, like, it's very efficient, right? You can write tests very fast. We already talked about computers are much faster than humans. And it does pretty well with one-to-one obvious translation. So like, if an API has a one-to-one mapping with another framework or API or something like that, it generally does a pretty good job making those interpretations. Also, I found that if you give it very loose like requirements and sort of let it make decisions, usually an end-to-end test it does okay with, unless it sometimes it'll fall off the rails and use like classes or things like that when you're trying to select an element. But generally, the more loose you are or the more strict you are, the better result you have. The tendency is to be kind of like, at least for me, I try to often go right down the middle, which is like the worst possible scenario. You need to be like overly explicit or overly generic. And then the cons, I think, are certainly worth talking about. It doesn't always use the best practices. Again, in our end-to-end test, it was selecting something from a class, which is kind of like a no-no. You wouldn't really want to do that unless you absolutely had to, because classes are pretty volatile. They often change. Nothing that indicates that this class is tied to a test. You think that this test is tied to some CSS or something like that. You may not have up-to-date APIs. So there are probably, like I said, an instance of Cypress component testing. A lot of times the APIs that are newer may not be in the model you're using. So you have to make sure that the models you're using are actually keeping up to date with the newest like frameworks and technology in the ecosystem. And this is like my biggest beef with this stuff, is that it fails quietly, right? So this fails like a major programming rule that says when a program has nothing interesting or surprising to say, it should say nothing. AI doesn't care about this. It just makes its own stuff up. It just goes wild, which is fine for some things. Like if you're doing if you ask it to write a poem and it does that, that's great. But when you want your test to be deterministic, that's not good, right? So this is the rule of silence, and at least currently, it is definitely a major violation of this. At Cypress, we think there are 3 pillars to a good testing tool, and we spent a lot of time sort of around these 3 things. So one being, how fast can I write a test, right? Testing isn't fun, so like I want to make writing tests as painless as possible, right? So how fast can I write a test? That's important. How deterministic that test is, that's important too, because if you write the test and you can't trust it, it's basically a waste of your time. And when inevitably one of your tests fails, how fast can you determine what went wrong with that test is very important for a testing tool. There's nothing worse than like a test fails and you have to like go digging to figure out why it failed. Like that is never fun for anyone. So with AI, it definitely helps with this first one. It helps you write a test with AI pretty fast. Like that part is a thumbs up for me. This part is like 2 thumbs down. Like it's not deterministic at all. I even played around with different models and like turned the temperature like completely off. So it would be like as deterministic as possible, and I was still getting variance. Again, I could potentially create a model that could be more specific, that gave very strict instructions. So we could potentially dial this in, but at the end of the day, maybe it's just like the skepticism of me. I still have a level of distrust with it. So until we can like fully trust and have determinism in our tests, I think this is definitely challenging. And then we didn't really talk about how fast we can determine what went wrong with our test. With AI, it could be used in this space, but we didn't really get into it in this talk. So dream with me for a second. So imagine a world where like frameworks didn't matter, right? Like it didn't matter. You could the framework was really nothing that you even really cared about, which is kind of crazy because we have framework wars and all that kind of stuff. We care about this stuff. But like instead of checking in our source control, maybe we checked in prompts that said, these are the instructions that I need some AI model to generate for my application. And along with that are tests. So you would have tests that basically assert your application passes these sets of standards. And the prompts that tell AI to generate these things, those get checked in the source control. You could, in theory, then get human readable code. So, like PMs and business people, they would really like this probably until it didn't work. And then they come asking us for help. You could, in theory, focus more on your UI, UX. And obviously, we could potentially ship faster in an ideal world, but it's not probably that it's not really a reality, at least today. But what I think how we will use AI is one of two examples. So we'll probably use it like a little bit for both writing tests and for writing our code. Maybe not 50%, maybe 0, maybe 10%, maybe depend upon the project. We'll probably use tools that leverage these things, but we'll use some combination of them. How we could use that, though, I tried to approach this from like an extreme position. So we could use it where we're like using it not at all for our writing our code, but using it as much as possible for our tests, which is probably what we really want because we don't like writing tests, and that would be great. However, we have to get to a point where we can trust those tests. So you could potentially do something like this, or we could potentially do something like this, where we could use AI and leverage it more for our code generation and less on, and like write our tests like that's the thing we write, right? So again, these are probably extremes, and we'll probably live we'll probably do a combination of either one of them, but we probably won't like go heavy on both ends of these spectrums, at least not for a while. So when it comes to Cypress, this is like where we're headed and how we're thinking about AI. So we really feel like testing is sort of the landscape is shifting. And so what I mean by that is we focus, like I said, on those 3 pillars, and those are basically centered around writing tests. Like we want to make sure like you as a developer, when you're writing tests, you have the best experience possible. So we spent a lot of time and energy on that. We also have Cypress Cloud, which helps you like manage your tests, and like as you write more and more tests, it becomes more and more difficult to manage. And so that's something that we have been working on as well. But in Cypress version 13, we ship something called Test Replay. I don't know if any of you are using it, but essentially what it is previously with Cypress, we would record a video in the background of your test running, and if it failed or something, you could go and play the video, which is helpful, but not that meaningful. But with Test Replay, because Cypress lives in the same runtime loop as your application, we actually can capture everything in your application. So we're capturing every state of the DOM, every network recall, all the source files, literally console logs. You can now replay that directly in the browser, which is really cool. It makes managing the test really great. But the other thing that's even more important is that it actually unlocks a whole other set of things for us, meaning that we can now think of tests as not just like a pass-fail thing in our system, but more of a, how do we improve our overall app quality of our application? Because what we can do is now we can take the data, basically your tests become like the data in which we can derive decisions. So we can now look at the tests that have ran, all the states of your application, and basically make inferences and surface things to you. Like, hey, there are parts of your application that your users can and do interact with that aren't tested appropriately. We can now surface that without any configuration because, again, your tests become the data in which we can then surface decisions. We just had a talk, several of them, on accessibility. Same thing with this is that we can now look at we have your entire DOM in a database. So now we can then go and surface your accessibility, or more importantly, your inaccessibility directly to you. So it makes sort of app quality, like how well is your app tested, how accessible is your application. All those things can just be surfaced to you just by writing tests, which is really awesome, as well as visual diff. So you can go from one commit to the next. You don't have to say, hey, take a snapshot here, take a snapshot there. We can make these inferences sort of out of the box with zero configuration, which I'm really excited about. So, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, by leveraging tests, it gives us a holistic approach to application quality, and there's a whole gamut of things that we can do beyond this. So, in close, I asked AI, what is the future of AI and testing? And it said this: while AI holds significant potential for the future of testing, it is important to note that human expertise and judgment will continue to play crucial roles. Whew. We're okay for now, guys. Or at least it just wants us to think we're okay. So, in recap, AI doesn't completely suck, and testing still matters, at least to me. If you haven't joined our Discord and you want to hang out there, you can do so. And again, thank you guys so much for having me. Wonderful to be here in New Orleans with you guys.